Well, my name is Megan Cox. I am new to the matching specialist position here, but not new to the industry. I have been working in the surrogacy industry for a little over 2 years now, and started a little bit with the psychological evaluations with surrogates. My history is in mental health and conducting those evaluations for surrogates and egg donors. And then I quickly found that I loved working in the matching department and kind of the puzzle piecing that goes into finding the perfect fit for everybody so that they have a good journey moving forward. So currently, as a matching specialist, my role is to look at all of the different moving parts, the surrogate's preferences, the intended parent's preferences, and a fertility clinic's requirements in order to not only find the best fit on paper, but to also facilitate, those first introductory meetings and allowing intended parents and surrogates to really have the foundation and the conversations that are important to kind of building that first relationship that's going to really build and grow into the relationship that serves their journey and helps produce a happy and healthy baby. So I kind of will go at it from both sides here. So I'll start with kind of from the surrogate intake process. We have a surrogate outreach team and a surrogate intake team that really take a surrogate from step one of applying all the way through being what we call ready to match. So that's going to include those first initial educational interviews and talking with the surrogates and laying out the foundation of what a surrogacy journey entails. Those processes in the beginning are so important because it's a great concept to be a surrogate and get excited about the journey, but there are so many ins and outs that until you really learn about it, it's hard to gauge that level of commitment. So that beginning outreach process is so important. And then as they move into that intake piece, that's where we're going to collect all of their medical records. We're going to really get them what we, like I said, call ready to match. And those records are going to be sent to a third party for review as well, so that we really have a good understanding of what her pregnancy history entails. And then that is going to give us a really good idea of what fertility clinics she's going to qualify for based upon her medical history. And then at that point, from the other side, we have our intended parents who meet with our client relations and business development specialist, and she's going to really outline what Giving Tree has to offer. And once they are, sold and ready to move forward with Giving Tree as a whole, they're going to come to me, and I'm going to look at our surrogates and who we have ready to go. And I'm going to find the best possible options for them that align with the fertility clinic that they're working with, that align with the specific preferences they've outlined. Maybe that includes, a certain age range, or maybe that includes a certain number of pregnancies or a certain geographical location. Whatever those pieces might be, I will look at all of their preferences and find the surrogate that aligns best with those. And like I said, this is coming from 3 different perspectives here. So I have the surrogate's preferences, the intended parent's preferences, and those fertility clinic requirements. And I'm looking to make sure that all 3 align in order to create the best possible match. And so at that point, I might be skipping ahead here as I ramble, but at that point is when we're going to do that first introductory meeting. And that first meeting is really the main foundation of creating this match. This is where they'll talk about all the important things. They'll talk about termination stances and how many embryos are to be transferred and what type of relationship they want throughout the journey. They'll talk about the relationship afterwards and privacy throughout the whole process, and really just get a chance to know one another. And I kind of joke about it being like an awkward first blind date. Like they don't know what to expect coming into it, but it's so important for them to really take what's on paper in these profiles that drew them to one another and make sure that initial connection is there, that they feel like they can build upon moving forward. Sure, absolutely. I think, the difference that really sets Giving Tree apart is the number of surrogates coming in and applying to work with Giving Tree. I think it, exceeds that of other agencies. We really have such a great surrogate, I call called the compensation package, but it's not just the compensation. It is all of the additional support that is given to our surrogates and the small touches that really bring surrogates back, whether it be them referring it to other friends or family members to become surrogates, or to complete additional journeys after their first. I think that overall package really draws surrogates to us, which does give us that opportunity to give intended parents more options. And I think in a situation, with intended parents have such little control over these situations. You're either facing infertility or this is the only way for you to have a genetic child. It's important for them to be able to have control where they can. And I think Giving Tree gives that control back to intended parents of being able to have, certain preferences throughout their matching process and be able to look at more than one profile in order to make a decision about a surrogate. I think it's important that they get that opportunity to just exercise some control in such a bigger picture of a situation that they often feel like they've lost control of some of the pieces. So I think, that, like you said, is something that really differentiates Giving Tree from other agencies. Sure. I think one of the biggest things, dependent on what an intended parent is looking for in terms of their journey. If they're looking for, attending every appointment or, being very, very connected and involved with their surrogate, geographical location is probably one of the biggest preferences that I see intended parents looking for, whether that be physically close to them or physically close to their fertility clinic. I think that is one of the number one preferences that I see intended parents looking at. Some other things might just be some pregnancy history preferences, but usually that's kind of weeded out by your fertility clinic anyways. So whatever your fertility clinic is going to require in terms of health and pregnancy history and age and things like that, I tend to see intended parents deferring to their fertility clinic and their providers' preferences on that. But I think support throughout the journey is a big piece, and I think that looks different to some people. Some intended parents, support might mean that they have a spouse that they've been married to for X amount of years, but other intended parents, that might just look like, well, my mom lives 2 blocks away from me and she's super involved with me and my kids. It could be very different for each intended parent. So I think just seeing that overall level of support for their surrogate so that they're confident their surrogate has those additional resources throughout the journey to make sure that they're fully cared for and have some additional assistance throughout the journey. Outside of that, I don't really see any major preferences that intended parents come up with. Occasionally during, our initial match call with the surrogate, they might ask a couple things, whether that be like, only have 1 cup of coffee a day or things like that. But usually that's not a hard preference when it comes to that initial matching, initial matching. Usually it just is something that's talked about throughout the match meeting as they develop a relationship. But I think mostly just that geographical location, that support system, and kind of those health pieces are probably the main 3 points that I see intended parents, looking for key qualities in their surrogate. Absolutely. It really all starts on that first match call. And I think that's why I enjoy the matching process so much, is that first meeting is such a foundational piece of the relationship, because we do go through, setting those expectations. We go into all the specifics in terms of how often do you want to talk? Do you want to FaceTime once a week? Do you want to text? Is it a group text message between all the parties that you're texting every day? Is it sending a weekly bump picture? What does that look like? What are the intended parents hoping for? And what is the surrogate comfortable with? Or what is she hoping for in terms of how much the intended parents are reaching out and checking on her? So, all of those pieces are really talked about up front, so that those expectations are set and known ahead of time. And that way the intended parents and the surrogate know, like, okay, I can commit to X, Y, Z, but maybe doing, maybe talking on the phone and FaceTiming 4 times a day is a little too much for me. So, they look at all those specifics during that initial match call, just so that everybody feels confident in what each party wants from the other. And we establish, what are those modes of communication going to be? Maybe it's email, maybe it's FaceTiming from the doctor's appointment, maybe it's attending the doctor's appointments. So all of those pieces, like I said, are talked about during that initial match call. But then post-match call, they transition onto the case coordination team. And that process is so individualized. Our case coordinators, something I think that differentiates us from, other agencies is just the caseload of our case coordinators is much lower than other agencies. And I think what's so great about that is it does give those case coordinators the opportunity to be extra involved and to help facilitate any communication that's needed and to really help them continue to foster that relationship. Because in the beginning, it's hard to know what everybody, you don't want to be too intrusive. You don't want to be too standoffish. You want to make sure that you're giving each side what they need. But it's hard to know what that is at first until they start to get to know each other. So through that, medical screening and legal clearance process, that case coordinator really helps to facilitate that relationship and kind of create the foundation for it. So once they're at transfer and past transfer, they really have, had that opportunity to build that foundation to continue forward on. I think the matching process always seems, I think, very exciting. I think it feels like step one, right? They've, came to an agency and they've become established and they're ready to match. So I like to encourage everybody, whether it's the surrogates or the intended parents, to come into matching with an open mind. I know I talked about, I'm going to present the best potential options on paper, but paper is just that. That's all it is. It's just words on a sheet of paper. And I think it's so important to remember that behind these profiles that everybody's seeing are human beings, and what might be portrayed on paper might not necessarily give off the same kind of vibes or connections that you might feel if you were to get on a match call with somebody. So I think, my closing words or, my takeaway from matching is to just always go into matching with an open mind, and kind of an idea of, what it is that you're looking for and what those hard lines are for you. But I think it's important to remember that preferences are preferences, and it's just great to kind of take each candidate and take a look at them and make sure that you're giving them a shot, and understanding that, that match call is just so imperative to creating that first foundation, and how great it is to be able to start that. So I think it's important to have an open mind as you come into matching, and just be communicative with your matching specialists, because we want to make sure we find the best fit for you. So just making sure you're coming into it sharing all possibilities that you're looking for, and know that we're going to do our best to find that best candidate for you.